Proportional Response. Book 1. Chapter 12, Part 6. Crop Circles Really. Hannibal sat with Vashna enjoying the fighter practice, and he found her company. He began to explain how the fighting worked, the armor, and the weapon styles. When he got to the latter, she surprised him with a great depth of knowledge about ancient Venter weapons and their uses, and they quickly had a running commentary going on the skills and capabilities of each combatant. All the while he did his best to keep an eye on his aunt as Henry worked with her. He watched him help her get into armor, and didn't even need to see her expression to know that she was playing a little dumb to keep his attention, and that she was deliberately being slow on the uptake, as he showed her how to use a sword. Now, I just wish I could figure out how much of her interest is personal, and how much is her planning that interview. Vashna caught him watching them one time too many, and responded with a knowing smile. You don't have to worry about your Aunt Ambassador. She is a big girl, and she can take care of herself, I promise, even with the big bad human. Hannibal smiled back at her and gave her a mock severe look. That big bad human is someone I count among my closest friends, I will have you know, despite the difficulties between our governments. Someone better be listening. I hate saying things like that. I am not sure if my aunt is the one I should be worried about. The pronouncement earned him a strange glint in her eye, one which somehow made him decidedly uncomfortable. She laughed softly. Oh, then I can make no guarantees, I am afraid. Your aunt is a formidable woman after all. He laughed and shook his head as they took up their commentary on the fighting again. Nearly 2 hours and several bouts by his aunt had passed when he looked out on the field and realized that the men he'd thought were the Duke and Henry were others who had put on armor which matched theirs. His comms unit buzzed on his wrist, and he shut it down without even looking. He stood and offered Vashna a hand, then put her hand in the crook of his elbow and started for the gaming areas. She raised an eyebrow at him quizzically, but he just motioned towards the games. They walked, seemingly without purpose, past several tables and through a door into the human embassy. Once the door closed, his wrist buzzed again, and they made haste to Henry's office. They found Henry, the Duke, his wives, and a Zoltan. It took him a moment to recognize her as the one with the hauntingly beautiful song from the performances a few weeks ago, sitting and enjoying drinks. He felt Vashna tense up when she laid eyes on the Zoltan and heard her gasp slightly. He turned to give her a reassuring look, but saw Lady Golnar out of the corner of his eye. The lady gave Vashna a vanishingly fast, sharp look, which Vashna responded to with a look of chagrin that came and went so fast he nearly missed it. He missed any response from Golan and settled on patting Vashna's hand reassuringly. I wish I'd known the Zoltan would be in this little meeting. I'd have warned her. By the time they cleared the door, the moment had passed, and Vashna had regained her composure. He heard Kasler speak in amused tone. Crop circles, man? Really? Henry laughed and held up a hand. Not on orders, I assure you. We shouldn't be surprised though. It is an open secret that you people did that during your observation of Earth, and some joker in each squad decided it would be a good way to send a little message. By the by, I'm curious, what were those circles about back then anyway? Our intel guys still try to analyze the few that we have confirmed were not done by humans, but have found nothing in the way of meaning. Kaslo got a sly grin on his face, but it was Golnar who, after a gale of laughter, answered. It was a college prank by a handful of students sent to the observation station. Remember, that station was manned by nearly 200 academics, and only a handful of them knew about Kenfistration. A fair number of those academics were students and, well, it is a universal constant that university students get bored easily and proceed to do stupid things. Henry stared at her with a blank look on his face. He had to admit that he'd never seen his brother in a state of shock before. You mean to tell me, one of the first indicators which made my counter-movement realize that humanity was being observed, a realization that helped lead to understanding that we were being manipulated, and which we have spent countless hours trying to decipher and understand the meaning of, was a college prank? Hannibal froze in place, and he noticed that Lady Yoro had done the same. There was an edge to Henry's voice, and Hannibal didn't like the way his friend was looking around the room. Kasler leaned forward with a mischievous smile on his face. Yep. Bored kids stamped nonsense in some fields. They thought they wouldn't get caught, but of course they did. Luckily for them, our puppets in the earth, governments acted, of their own accord, to settle the issue by paying people to make even more of them, then take credit a few years later in order to make anyone who tried to claim alien interference look stupid. The fact that the humans responded so strangely to the whole thing was the only thing that saved the kids from court proceedings. It was written up as an impromptu, unapproved, but harmless experiment, and the kids were quietly shuffled back into academic life and permanently barred from fieldwork. Henry sat there and looked at the royals, shock on his face. You are having a laugh at my expense. That is really... Wait, no, you said they wrote it up. I would have been briefed. Oh, come now, Henry. Do you really think that your intel people have gone through every word of every report produced by 200 scientists over the course of so much time? It got a footnote at best, and was probably deliberately buried in other reports and accidentally not properly indexed. Then, how is it that you have the information so readily at hand? I asked about some extra security protocols that had been placed on the shuttles when I made my last visit. Namely, that students were not allowed in the shuttle bay, much less to leave in the shuttles, without senior faculty supervising them. And they told me that there had been 2 incidents with students, the one with the crop circles and another where some student had sabotaged another's shuttle, and the one who crashed went to a science fiction convention to try and get parts he needed to fix it, and nearly ended up on camera. Henry looked around the room in disbelief for a moment, then threw his head back and laughed. All that time, all those years, and it was a college prank. Part of me wants to find those students and thank them. Part of me wants to box their ears. I can't. He trailed off, shaking his head. Enable couldn't help but laugh as he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Just then, his aunt sprang into the room. He could think of no better description of her movements. Her hands were still flushed. A broad smile seemed to have been etched across her face, and she seemed to be walking on her toes. She bounced over to the empty seat next to Henry and flopped down into it. Enable noticed that she'd shucked both her armor and the athletic top she'd been wearing to fight in, leaving her wearing just the sports bra, which showed off her ample cleavage and the flush of her upper chest. She also still smelled a bit of sweat and exertion. Of course, so did Henry, Kasler, and Golner. Henry handed her a fresh towel, which she took gratefully, while tossing the one in her hand aside. I had no idea that weapons combat could be so much fun. I mean, I've taken my fair share of self-defense, but it was all about breaking away from an attacker and then escape and evade. This, though, just being in that armor is almost intoxicating. Thank you. Henry, Golner, Zoltan, and Kasler all chuckled softly. Enable started slightly to hear Vashna join in, but felt a grin spread across his face all the same. She was always irrepressible and wild. Guess her young friend already knows that. I'm betting she is equally vivacious too, once you get through the Good Apprentices Act. His aunt then looked to the Zoltan. I must say, I really enjoyed my bout with you, Elira. You seem to be just starting out, like me, and not so far ahead of me in skill that I can't get a shot in. That said, you still put a real nice bruise on my leg. Elira bowed her head and gave her a tight smile. I enjoyed our bout too, and look forward to more. I'll admit you surprised me with your vigor, and that trick where you got my shoulder is one I won't explain. She gave her a mocking sharp look, then they both laughed. I find this semi-ritual combat invigorating as well, in more ways than one. Non-voting citizens are strictly forbidden from owning weapons in any form or participating in any form of martial arts unless they take a profession, like soldier or police, that requires it, and even then what they are taught is strictly controlled. To be able to just pick up a weapon and learn how to use it, you have no idea how liberating that feels. Henry smiled at her. You are a free woman now, and a citizen of the Confederation of Worlds. You can learn any weapon you like. If you ask the Colonel, he will also set you up with some range time, and you can learn firearms while you are at it. Elira sat bolt upright in her chair and turned wide eyes on Henry. You would do that? You would allow me to learn to shoot? He would do that, take the time to train me? Henry nodded. The Colonel probably won't teach you himself, but he is the man to ask to be set up for instruction. As for allowing you, Dear woman, I am not allowing you to do anything, because in order for me to allow you to do something, it would have to be within my power to prevent it, which it is not. Enable watched the scales on Alira's face rise in the alternate equivalent of a blush as a large smile played down her snout. She bowed slightly to Henry and looked about to speak, but Yoro held up a hand and cut her off. I am glad, dear woman, that you are happy and learning what it means to be free. Sadly, I think we need to get down to business now. We are all here and do not have a lot of time before we are missed.